And we are back for the Thousand Worlds Book Club, and we're talking about In the House of the Worm. I am joined by Daario Naharis. I bring gifts and glad tidings. If you haven't read In the House of the Worm, I have the text and audio below, as well as the comic book. The comic book plot is mostly the same. The text is about 32 pages or a couple hours to listen to. I believe that humanity's story with the others is essentially the plot of In the House of the Worm. So if you're going to read one story from the Thousand Worlds, well, make it A Song for Leah, but if you're going to read two, make it In the House of the Worm. So if you haven't read or listened to In the House of the Worm, pause, go do that, come back. Now Daario, you have read all of A Song of Ice and Fire and the Thousand Worlds? No, I do not know how to read. But I have forced women to read me the books by knife point. Well, in our first two stories, we dealt with the Double War, which led to the Interregnum. This is a period of technological regression. Our last story, Bitterblooms, took place on an Interregnum world. In the House of the Worm also takes place on an Interregnum world. Technology has regressed back to the Middle Ages. The most important piece of information that's absent from the story is the meaning of the Golden Theta. The Golden Theta is the symbol of Earth's ecological engineering core. The core were powerful geneticists who waged biowar against the Findi and the Harangans in the Double War. Somehow the Golden Theta has become the sigil of the people of our story, the Yagg-Lahai. Our protagonist, Annalyn, wears a Golden Theta the entire story. The Yagg-Lahai, or the Worm Children, are a rather decadent people. They spend their time partying and fucking, and have made a delicacy of another race called the Grounds. They also worship a rather disgusting religion where their religious leader, the Man-Worm, has to have his arms, legs, penis, eyes, and everything else removed until he's more like a worm. The Yagg-Lahai's numbers are dwindling and their sun is burning out, but they're not doing anything about it. Our story opens with Annalyn at a party trying to get laid. He's interrupted by a ground hunter called the Meatbringer. The Meatbringer embarrasses Annalyn, and Annalyn's date goes off and fucks the Meatbringer. So Annalyn and his friends decide they're going to get some revenge. And so later the three descend into the earth to try to find and kill the Meatbringer. However, the three are all expecting to wuss out before they actually go through with it. The three run into a knight named Groff who is also going to kill the Meatbringer, and he forces them to keep going. They eventually run into the Meatbringer and discover that he's been murdering people and feeding them to Grounds, just as he's been murdering Grounds and feeding them to people. The Meatbringer is sort of half person, half ground, and he thinks he can have sex with both Grounds and people and try to fashion a third race. This disgusts Groff, who tries to kill the Meatbringer, but the Meatbringer turns out the lights and kills all of our protagonists except for Annalyn, who runs off. Annalyn is left in pitch dark, doesn't know how to get back, and has a breakdown. However, he eventually gets his act together and starts exploring. He eventually finds a Ground, and then a large dead eater worm, and then some live eater worms, and then finds an ancient chamber of the Change Masters where he learns about the history of his planet. He finds a helmet that helps him see in the dark, and then befriends a Ground by fighting an eater worm with him. He is introduced to the Ground civilization, and then is brought close to home. He then faces off against the Meatbringer, and is able to defeat him because he too can now see in the dark. Annalyn returns home to become an advocate of making peace with the Grounds, but most people just find him generally amusing. So Daario, what is your overall impression of In the House of the Worm?
This is now our fourth anti-war story, and with this one it's very hard not to think about Jacques Vance.
Jacques Vance?
Jacques Vance and the Dying Earth. It is a story series where the sun is dying.
Oh yes, Jack Vance. He was a huge influence on our author. The two House Vances of the Riverlands are actually references to Jack Vance. House Vance of Wayfarer's Rest is in reference to the work Leanne the Wayfarer, and their sigil references the Dragon Masters and the Eyes of the Overworld. House Vance of Atlanta is in reference to Bad Ronald, and their sigil is in reference to the Last Castle and the Dragon Masters. Our author even wrote a story in honor of Jack Vance in 2009 called A Night at the Tarn House.
So the setting here is pretty much the same as the Dying Earth. Technology has regressed, the population is shrinking, and the people are hedonistic and fatalistic. But Preston, I have to say I am a little bit confused about the history of this planet.
Yeah, it's a bit confusing as we keep hearing histories that aren't actually accurate. Clearly the use of the Golden Theta tells us that the Earth's ecological engineering core were the first settlers on the planet. Annalyn speaks the prayer of the Yagg-Lahai at one point, which mentions that the ships are gone. This seems to be in reference to the Interregnum, where space travel is lost. However, the core are still incredible geneticists, so there seems to be some movement on the planet to adapt humanity to better survive. But I think there was a schism among the Change Masters because we find that there are golden thetas and silver thetas. I think that the golden theta becomes associated with the Yagg-Lahai near the surface. However, the concept of genetic alteration to better adapt gets weirdly distorted into their religion. I think that the Silver Theta faction became the Grounds. There seems to be some disagreement on who created the Eater Worms. The Meatbringer thinks it was the Yagg-Lahai, but Annalyn clearly finds them among a Ground Changemaster. So it may be that both societies created their own problems. The Yagg-Lahai created their fatalistic, disgusting religion, and the Grounds created the Eater Worms that are killing them. Now Daario, I'd like to get back to your point about this being a fatalist world. Some people wonder if Westeros is dying, hopeless, and destined for destruction. Everyone expects a battle for the dawn. But here we have a clear positive growth arc for our protagonist, from not caring and being resigned, to caring and wanting to save the world. The story ends with some hope, albeit a small hope for the Yagg-Lahai and the Grounds. It is very existentialist. Man makes his own destiny. Annalyn is very much the Jaime character. Absolutely. Like Jaime, he starts out blonde, spoiled, self-absorbed, and wants to have sex with himself. Incidentally, sex with oneself is a reoccurring theme for our author. But Annalyn essentially grows to become a hippie. An hippie? Absolutely. The message of the story is that the Grounds and the Yagg-Lahai need to be breeding with each other rather than eating each other. It's make love, not war. I believe in making love and in making war. In succession. Or concurrently. And that's why you're a villain. A villain? Oh, no. Later, I will murder you. So, Daario, do you think there are parallels here between the Grounds and the others? Well, they are certainly both a poorly understood foe, but why would people want to fuck the others? Well, in the House of the Worm, the humans and the Grounds are supposed to breed to fashion a third race to fight the Eater Worms. Not to mention the sun is dying, and the humans are going to have to move underground anyway eventually. It could be on Planetos that a long winter is coming, and that the humans and the others need to breed to produce cold-resistant humans. But in the House of the Worm, the Grounds and the Yagg-Lahai need to unite against the common enemy of the Eater Worms, yes? Maybe the others are the common enemy for people to unite against. Perhaps, but I'm almost certain our author named the others ironically after the sociological, anthropological, and existential term of the other. This is something our author has written about in his other works, namely wildcards. Their foreignness is an imagined human construct. Besides, the Eater Worms aren't really a common enemy. They're kind of humanity's own damn fault. They seem to be a bioweapon gone bad. Now, the Yagg-Lahai worship the worms, yes? Well, it's complicated. They worship an entity called the White Worm that their religious leader tries to emulate. However, Annalyn does find a dead Eater Worm that he mistakes for the White Worm momentarily. God is dead. Very Nietzsche. It's true, our story seems to have a lot of existential themes. There seems to be a battle of philosophies going on. The Meatbringer seems to be a Nietzscheist. He rejects religion and slave morality and seeks truth and authenticity, and he's trying to create a new race of men, the Ubermensch. However, he seems to be an immoralist and an elitist. Annalyn seems to be more the Sartre character, deals with the anxiety of freedom and choosing his path in the face of the other. And in the end, he believes his actions are inseparably social. Sartre said, "Am I really the kind of man who has the right to act in such a way that humanity might guide itself by my actions?" Annalyn is a guide for society. The Meatbringer is not. So you think George R.R. Martin is an existentialist? Possibly. Probably. Our author has said he is an atheist, and he said that his earlier work has to do with existential loneliness. Perhaps he retains these views. It's hard to say. So what does this mean for A Song of Ice and Fire? Well, it's pretty clear that our author has put time into thinking about existentialism. He has said so in interviews, and in the House of the Worm seems to have some Nietzsche and Sartre themes. And existentialists, especially Sartre, strongly believe that man chooses his own destiny, which is in direct opposition to the idea of prophecy. And as you know, I think all prophecy in A Song of Ice and Fire is bullshit. But your belief rests on the author repeating himself. Absolutely, and all authors do repeat themselves. In fact, In the House of the Worm is very similar to a story that he wrote 2 years earlier called Dark, Dark Were the Tunnels. It's another post-apocalyptic tale where humans need to breed with a subterranean people who are being killed off by monster worms. And of course these monster worms appear in A Song of Ice and Fire in the mines of Valyria. I suppose in this story he did say the burrow was endlessly black and full of terrors. Speaking of repeating oneself, the Meatbringer reminds me a lot of Ramsay Snow. They both are amoral and like to skin people. Since the Meatbringer is half Ground and half Yagala-hai, I wonder if Ramsay Snow might be half human, half other. The story of Roose Bolton and the washerwoman is very odd. Well, that was just a random thought to end on. Anyway, I'd like to thank Daario Naharis for being here with us. Thank you. I had a good time, but it may be because I am drunk. Next time we'll be learning a lot more about Earth's Ecological Engineering Corps with the Plague Star. This is the first story in the Tough Voyaging series, and this is much lighter and funnier work. The link for the story is below. See you next time.